Thanks, Susan.
Great. Oh, thank you, Ashley, for that introduction. And let me pull up our presentation so we can just get started. There's so much to talk about tonight. So, yes, I want to welcome each of you to our workshop, Branding Yourself on LinkedIn. And we think that you're going to find this to be very helpful no matter what you're trying to do, whether you're looking for that next role and you want to attract recruiters or hiring managers, or perhaps you have your own business or want to start your own business and want to attract clients. Whatever you want to do, LinkedIn is the number one professional networking site. And so maximizing your presence there with branding statements and content that brings people to your page and once there engages them is exactly what we're going to show you tonight. So it's very exciting, and I'd like to begin the program now. And so, as Ashley said, please feel free to put any comments in chat, any questions at any time. Typically, I'll deliver something and then invite you to participate, through chat. But at any time, feel free to do that as questions come up or you want to make comments. So great. So here, let's look at our agenda here. Today, like we said, we're going to be talking about first, what is personal branding? So let's look at that to begin with, because no matter where you're using it, there's going to be some commonalities there, and that's important to understand what it's about. And then we're going to also help you be able to create your own. So I have several templates that I've developed that will help you step by step draft your own statements. And I think that's also important so that you can apply things that we're talking about tonight and then create your own messaging and then put that on LinkedIn when the time is right for you. So after we lay that groundwork, we're then going to turn our attention to apply these principles to LinkedIn profiles. So we're going to take a tour of various samples out there, what works, maybe we'll find some that don't work. But you can see quickly that there's a lot of different ways you can do it, although there are some principles that I like to also convey so that you can kind of walk away with kind of important action plans to enhance your own LinkedIn profile. So let's get started now to look at what personal branding is. So, what do you think leads people to want to act on your page when they land on it? The answer, you might not be surprised, is clear branding statements and messages that let them know what value that you bring and how you can help them or their company succeed. And also, at the same time, you're really conveying a sense of who you are as a person and as a professional. So, all this will become clear as we get more into the details. So, to better understand how to strengthen your brand on LinkedIn, let's first look at what personal branding is at its heart. So, as you see here on the screen, personal branding is the effort to consistently communicate and present an individual as an authority, elevating their credibility and differentiating themselves from the competition. It is built on the individual's skills, qualities, experience, and achievements. So there's a lot there, but what we're really going to focus on tonight is that last statement, is really looking at skills, qualities, experiences, and achievements, how you identify them for yourself that helps you understand what's most important, what you value most about what you can do and who you are, and then clearly and consistently communicating that on LinkedIn and in other platforms too. So what's this about? Why do you as a professional need a personal brand? So we look at it to show the marketplace how you bring value. And here by marketplace, we really mean who is your target audience? It's a very specific, industry, field, or type of customer or end user of what you're offering. Also, a personal brand helps differentiate you from the competition. And another way we might hear about something like that is what's your unique value proposition? So we'll talk about defining your value. And when possible, we want to show something about that's differentiating ourselves up from people that are offering something similar. And then finally, what I want to show you here is a personal brand gives you career security. So note that we're not really saying, and it's not really the same as saying job security. It's actually questionable whether or not there is such a thing as job security these days. And that isn't necessarily a problem if you develop a clear reputation based on branding. And that really will help you above and beyond any specific job you have today or tomorrow, because it will stay there as what you're offering no matter what. That's what we're going to talk about, is how you can get career security through branding. So now let's take a little bit of a dive in here and look at what really is this about. I already mentioned when we defined what personal branding is, the importance of skills, qualities, experience, and achievements. And then against a marketplace, your target audience. So you can see all these building blocks here, if you will. So when you look at these four components, keep them in mind as we talk tonight and look at profiles and as we look at even our value statements coming up, because this is really going to be what you want to bake in and understand about yourself. So it follows then that self-awareness is really the first step in really understanding what you're offering. So I like to use that word, your offer. And that's like all of these things right here, your skills, qualities, experiences, and how you bring value. So that really is a great place to start. And so you want to ask, what are the skills and qualities that it took to get the achievements and outcomes that I brought throughout my career to make an impact? If you're someone who's just starting out, you want to keep this in mind as you go along and be aware of what's coming up for you as the most important skills that are behind successes. And so we'll talk about that a little bit shortly, but that's a great technique for just looking at what are my most important and defining skills and qualities, and that have led to my most, valued or even proud moments. So that's a really good technique. So when we understand what I like to call these key success factors, what are behind your successes or achievements, then we need to look at this in the context of the marketplace. So we see the skills and qualities, your experience, sometimes called expertise, that the education or certifications and credentials are part of that. We also talked about your achievements, what kind of results and impact you're going to bring and have brought. And then we get to, it's all delivered in the context of who it is that your target audience is. So that's an important concept in branding, who it is that you're trying to reach. So we need to see this in the context of the marketplace that maybe we're reaching today, or maybe that we want to reach. Each one of you might be in a different place in your careers. You could be somebody that's staying in the same swim lane and you just want that next level up, or you just not want a company that you'd really like to work for that shares your values. But it's possible that you're looking to make a shift, a pivot into something that's a little different, or even more dramatically, transform into a whole new career. So whatever you're looking to do, it's very important to start to understand what you're bringing and who you're bringing it for. This is just part of the process of self-discovery. So when we think about the marketplace, this can play out in various ways. In the simplest way, it's your target audience. Who do you serve? Who do you want to serve? Is there a field, an industry, a type of company, or a type of consumer? And then another way to look at your marketplace is not only your target audience, but the pain points in that field or marketplace. So by understanding your market's pain points or its needs, you can clearly start to show how you can solve its problems through your skills, qualities, and expertise. Another way to look at that is, how can you bring value to your target audience? And that's what this is all about. So I might say that a few times here, but really that's what it all comes down to. So this is a lot to digest, and I'd like to just take a pause here. If there's anyone who'd like to put a question or comment in chat, and Ashley is going to be there to keep an eye on that and bring forth anything that someone would like to share here today. And it could be something you want to share or ask of the whole group. I do have some expertise, but I love to also have a dialogue and other people can chime in as well. So please feel free now, if anything comes up at this point, to put it into chat. Okay, so hold those questions and thoughts and share them later if you want. Let's continue on. So we talked about understanding through kind of a process of discovery and self-awareness, if you will. What are some of these factors, these key success factors behind who you are today, and therefore what you're offering to people in your target audience? So, surveying your personal and professional self through the lens of a lifetime can really help you see that in many ways, you've probably been always this person that you are today. So, that is, your passions and talents and personality traits probably manifested themselves when you were a child. And then, in the same way, your strengths, maybe your capabilities, probably started emerging in school. So it's kind of an exercise to really self-reflect on where the patterns are and what that means for you right now. So specifically, let's take a look at this list. You can reflect on patterns that started in childhood that can include things like what were your pastimes or even the games you might have played in childhood that you love to play. Um, how did imagination and creativity show up for you? What did you love to do? So it's always a fun exercise to just look back and have a full life lens about where did it all start. And it's interesting sometimes to see that the patterns have always been there, and some of the things that you love to do today and that you're motivated to do, which is also part of branding and what you offer, really come to play from the very beginning. So the other thing we look at is skills. Remember, that was part of it. What are you good at? Your skills and talent. And so a lot of us have a lot of things that we can do well. We could probably all make a list of 10 or 15 things that we're good at, but it's also important about what's the easiest for you. Almost like another way to look at it, what's like breathing to you? And what do you like to do the most? So one way to look at that in terms of what's the most important there is to think about, well, when I think back, what have people always complimented me for? It could be someone in your family, your parents, your friends, someone at work. You might often be hearing some of the same things. And so that's what's important to really understand and help you kind of float to the top what you want to focus on or what's important to talk about when you talk about how you bring value and make a difference. And on the same end, we were just looking at the building blocks of branding. We also want to look at qualities. What are your attributes and personality traits? So when you look at that, what are your most valued? Again, there could be a long list of things that you can talk about yourself, but what's the most important to you? And again, one way to another perspective is to look at what coworkers and managers have said to describe you. Maybe it's been things in your performance reviews, or maybe you get comments often like, boy, when you're on the project and any project, people really seem to pull together. And somehow we always get the job done. And so you hear things like that and you think about it and you realize, well, gee, I seem to be really good at team leadership. And also, I'm also very good at collaborating. So I like to work with people. I don't want to sit in front of a computer all day. And so that's a really important thing to start to identify as most valued, most important qualities. And then finally, here, in terms of just the process of discovery and self awareness, which you can certainly continue this on your own later, I mentioned before, what are some of your most proud achievements, the successes I mentioned? And then when you start to identify them, what are the skills and qualities behind them? And so here, this is actually a very rich process. Is after identifying maybe just to say 6 to 12. successes in your career or work or school, any place. It doesn't have to necessarily be business that you're proud of, that you felt like you made an impact, you brought a good result. And so then when you look at these and list the skills and qualities that helped you be successful, again, your key success factors, you can start to see the patterns there, kind of the thread, if you will, that ties together your experiences and achievements. This process again really starts you to be aware of what's most important about me and how can I bring that to bring value and make a difference going forward. So we're going to use these insights to look at the templates I'll show you so that you can start writing your own value statement and branding statements. And so tonight we're just going to introduce you to this if you haven't done this already, but you'll have the tools to continue it on your own after today's session. We'll send you this presentation tomorrow. Ashley will follow up with that as well as the template for writing your value statement. So the point is for tonight, we're just going to get you started. We're going to get you thinking about what are the elements here. So before we look at these templates, because I know I'm really talking about a lot of things, let's take a pause here for any questions or comments that might come up for you at this moment. Anything in chat? Okay, so with that in mind, let's start diving into writing our branding statements. So tonight we'll look at two things: a value statement, sometimes called a branding statement, but I like to call it a value statement because that's more descriptive of what it is. What is the value you bring? And then your commercial. So these sort of go hand in hand. And I like to start with the value statement and think about it when we talk using the insights and the process of discovery and realizations about yourself that we were just going over together. So I like to think of this, your value statement is what's your pitch? Because if you think of it, it's like, what are you offering? And who are you offering it to? It's that simple. What are you pitching? So that's what we keep in mind when we really think about writing and drafting our own value statements. So why do we do this? To convey clearly and succinctly how you can help or bring value to a hiring manager or a client or anyone in your target audience. Who do you want to work for and work with? So here are the elements that go into this. The first one is, what do you do? What's your role? And so it's important to realize that isn't your title, but more like what it is that you do to bring, the value that you want to talk about. And again, that might be shifting for you. So sometimes I get questions like, well, I have been doing this, but I want to shift over into that. So with a value statement, there's going to be some, we talked about the thread that ties together your achievements, the common patterns. Think of it that way, that while the role might be shifting, behind it are some of the same skills and qualities. And that also, by the way, just as a side note, can help you really look at what are the transferable skills here. So keep that in mind, that when you identify these patterns, they can help you in other ways too, because people that are changing fields or doing a shift want to be able to sell themselves by showing that they've always done these types of things before. So this has a lot of value. So anyway, getting back to more specifically this template that you'll use, the role, and then how do you add value? And so for some people, they very specifically solve specific types of problems. Maybe they're a technical person and they're really good at fixing machines or technology or to help people be more productive. Maybe it's a way to look at it that's more helpful for you to is how do you get results? So if there's a problem given to you or you come up with, you see and identify something that needs to be done, which by the way is important too, how you add value as you see things that need to be done. That's another way to look at it. And if nothing else, you can always just take a high level look at what is the benefit that I have brought in the past to organizations or projects that I've worked on. And then from that, you can extrapolate to patterns. How do you do it? is another part of this value statement. And I like to call that, what's your secret sauce? And so by that is, okay, you're saying that you solve these problems that, or that you bring productivity to companies or whatever it is, but how do you get that done? And so the way I like to work with clients on that is, first we identify what your top competencies are. And in a resume, that's a whole section, right? Your core competencies, sometimes called your areas of expertise. And tonight we've been referring to them as your skills, the top skills. That's important to understand. Of your, say, 10 to 12 skills, what are the top, say, 1 to 3 that really make a difference and you bringing value? And then finally, we've talked about your marketplace or target audience. Who do you do it for? So now that we've given you the elements, the components of a value template, of a value statement, let's now put it all together and see an example. So the sample that you see on your screen that I'm going to read to you is one that somebody wrote by using this very template. So here goes. I'm an HR leader who makes improvements that help organizations operate at high levels of productivity by building structures so people can give their best and like what they do. So if you think about it, if we break that down, we're looking at the role. Well, the role here is that they're an HR leader. We didn't say they're an HR vice president because it's not a title, because again, this isn't for a job, it's for your career or the next role that you might be playing. So you want to keep it high level. And then this person brings value. What do they do to benefit the organization? They make improvements so that people are more productive. How do they do it? By building structures. And then who do they do it for? In this case, it's kind of broad, organizations. You know, some people will be very specific, like in schools or in factories. This person is an HR person who probably can work in different organizations. So a couple things to notice right away. This is a broad statement. And so it's very easy to get really detailed. I do this by A, B, and C, and getting a lot of uh, color to it. But realize a few things. One is, the purpose of this is just to pique someone's interest and to clearly and quickly and succinctly convey how you can help them. That's what it is. If you bake too much into that, it gets a little cerebral and it's hard for someone to digest it. So that's going to be a theme tonight. Quick, easy, digestible, connect the dots. You want to connect the dots. The other thing is, it can actually be an engagement tool. So as I'll show you, you can, and as is in the tip here, we can use this in a written form and we can use this in a verbal form. So for tonight, we're going to be focusing on LinkedIn profiles and how we use our value statements in them. So that will be our main focus. But again, I think it's really important to understand the core principles and uses of branding. And so if you're talking to someone and you just want to deliver the statement, look at how many opportunities there are to make a meaningful conversation and connection. So tell me, when you say building structures, they might say, what exactly do you mean by that? And that's a great opportunity for you to give more information. Yeah, the kind of structures I build are things like creating streamlined processes and developing projects and initiatives so that we can create higher levels of productivity so that people are really motivated and working at their peak capability. So then that's really intriguing. And so that's one thing. But the other thing is, we're going to, in a few minutes, show you the next part of messaging and branding with our 2-minute commercial template. And I'll give you an example for that too, that where you use your value statement to start it off and then you expand from there. So there's plenty of opportunity to give the details when you get to that point. So of the tips that I've written here, the one I like to mention here is that you can write more than one if you're still in discovery, or maybe you play several different roles and you need it for different things. So if you're someone who's exploring a couple career options, as one example, you could write several value statements and have it ready to bring out for different situations. I will say though, in LinkedIn, which is our focus tonight, you can really only be one thing. So while you might have a couple resumes to send to people that have different focuses or in conversations, such as networking conversations, you can adapt it. LinkedIn is really, you're selling one thing, it's your one billboard. So we'll get into that shortly, but you can see how that will work when we start getting more specific. So anyway, feel free to make as many as you need just to as a process to gain more clarity. And remember, this is a living, breathing thing. So you can, after you do some discovery, or maybe in another year from now, you want to do another pivot, whatever it is for you, you can adapt it again. And now you're going to have this template and the building blocks to do it. So it's great. This will really pay off in a lot of ways. So after tonight's session, as I mentioned, Ashley will send, I think it's tomorrow, she will send you this value statement template with the prompts that we've just looked at, and then you'll have it for yourself to use for a lot of different things. So right now, I want to take a look at going to the next step in your messaging. And then we're going to start looking at what does this mean for LinkedIn? So I mentioned that the branding statement or the value statement is really like the first sentence or a cornerstone actually of your 2-minute commercial. And so sometimes people call this their elevator speech or different things, but it's basically something that you're talking about. What are your strengths? How does your background qualify you for the next career move? So it's a very focused presentation, if you will, and it's very tailored to what you're doing next. It's not an opportunity to, when someone says, tell me about yourself, to give a long, history of all your jobs and, just something that's just more of a summary. It's not a summary, but it does summarize the important aspects of what you're offering today. So it's a concise presentation. So your commercial is a narrative about your strengths and career objectives. You can adapt it for verbal use, such as that classic interview question, tell me about yourself. And you can then have a delivered version. And I'm going to actually give you an example of one in a minute that's meant for verbal delivery. And then you can repurpose it for your resume and, most important for today, your LinkedIn About page. So this was very much a cornerstone messaging for when we get to how do you talk about yourself in LinkedIn. So what's in a 2-minute commercial? So like I just said, it's selling you, it's marketing you, it's branding you, right? For what you're offering next in your next act, even if it's just the continuation of what you've done. So the key thing is it ties together quickly your value that you bring, a summary of related experience to what you're offering, the key strengths that are relevant to what you're offering, and then an illustrative story, not required, but really makes a difference in giving the proof, if you will, of what it is you're claiming you're offering. So in your commercial, if you're saying, I'm really great at increasing productivity by creating structures, then this is an opportunity to show. And in fact, that's exactly what I'm going to do in a moment, is to use a story to show that. It also, by the way, keeps the attention of the reader or listener to, when you're kind of giving this verbal or written snapshot, it's always more interesting to see an anecdote. And that's why storytelling is so big these days, is tell your story. So that's what that does. And then finally, we're going to look at in LinkedIn particularly how you wrap it up. So you want to come in with a strong ending. Like any good story has a good beginning and a strong ending. And so for different purposes, that might be, what are you pursuing now if you're in an informational interview? Or how this job that I'm interviewing for today really fits my career trajectory. And that's why I can bring value. For LinkedIn, we're going to show you examples of how you can use the ending of your 2-minute commercial or your about page to wrap up in a big bow what the value is that you bring and do a call for action. So we'll show how in your about page or your summary page in LinkedIn, you want to drive to a call to action that reiterates what you can help somebody with. And that might sound very conceptual, but again, I love to give examples, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean shortly. So before we get into, let's look at LinkedIn branding and the actual examples. I want to give you an example of a 2-minute profile or a commercial. This one is a spoken version, but it's going to be the same formula that you can apply to your about page in LinkedIn. So when you get this presentation later, you can go back to this. This is essentially your template. You start out with the value you bring, related experience and key strengths. Look how short it is. It's only one statement. And again, I'll read it out. A short illustrative story showing proof of what you're offering, and then the wrap up. And that's adapted for the purpose, what you're pursuing now and want to do next, or in LinkedIn, there could be other approaches to that. So let me read it out to you. So I make improvements that help organizations operate at high levels of productivity and performance. In my career, I've straddled HR and operations roles, always with an eye towards setting up structures so that people can give their best and like what they do. For example, I was a hiring manager in a publishing house that produced high volumes of books. To meet demands, I developed workflows by resolving gaps and breakdowns. The result was that I crafted a well-oiled machine capable of producing about 50 concurrent titles. I improved our hiring methods, wrote a help guide, and I'm especially proud that we were successful in improving productivity while keeping employees engaged. So what I'm looking to do now is work for a company interested in creating programs that enhance employee development to improve performance. So that's one example of how you present it, and then you can adapt this for your about page in LinkedIn. And we're going to see some of those examples. So before we do that, any comments or questions you want to put in chat or in the Q&A for Ashley to interface and bring forward to the group? Okay, so let's now, in the second part of our session today, look at personal branding on LinkedIn. So consider this. Your LinkedIn profile is really often the centerpiece of your online career persona, in a sense. So it's that important, and yet most of us barely consider what we're offering there. So we might create a smorgasbord of experiences, missions, passions, and so forth, leaving it up to the reader to connect the dots and figure out what is it that you're offering, how you're really going to help me. Or people might go the other way, which is just to give the basics: your name, your current job, past titles, and your education. So the first approach might overwhelm the reader, and the second one might underwhelm them, so to speak. It just basically leave them starved for information and not really knowing what you're about. So for either approach, it's really a missed opportunity, because people might come to your page, but are they really going to stay there and see if you're someone who can help them? And if so, reach out to you. That's what we're really going to show you how to do. So wherever you are today and whatever your LinkedIn profile looks like, we're going to show you how to make it either more or less, perhaps, of what you have now to be more effective. And so really the main point here is, no matter how you really are in a role, how great you are in your achievements, if you aren't able to articulate your value easily and quickly in LinkedIn, it's much harder to gain traction and to get action to move forward in whatever you're looking to do. So on this screen here, you see for personal branding in LinkedIn, we're going to be looking at the headline, the photo, and the about page. Those are the prime areas of real estate that we really are going to want to talk about. And so with that, we're going to start with the headline. This is number one. And so in the headline, you'll see a headshot and a background photo. And I'm sure you have one there of each, or at least you have a placeholder for that. So we're going to focus on tips to create a strong headline based on more recent trends in LinkedIn, and share examples that, again, are going to be building on skills, qualities, experience, and value. So all the things that we've been talking about, you're going to see how they can play out. There's no one way to do it, just like everything, but you'll hopefully come away with some ideas on doing your own. So your photo and headline can be looked at like your billboard, and that instantly shows your offer. So think of it like driving down the highway and having mere seconds to digest what a person is selling or a company is selling in a billboard that you pass by quickly. That experience is exactly what it's like for recruiters and others stopping by your page. They will often just size you up in mere moments or seconds. So if you don't have a photo, a headshot, or one that doesn't look professional, they might just move on right then and there. That's probably less than a second. And there are other things too that will capture their attention, or the opposite, turn them away. So that's really important. So our trick here is going to be using keywords and branding keywords to get them to your page, and then more keywords and branding techniques to keep them there. So here are my five top branding tips for the header. So we talked about keywords, and if most of you might be familiar with it, that's something we're concerned with when we put our resume into a portal to apply for a job. What you're really wanting to do there is make sure that your keywords are matching up to that job posting as much as possible, so that you can come up and search, because there's applicant tracking systems to do that. Same concept with LinkedIn. So people search for you using keywords like your skills, your roles. That's what you want to show. And so also this can double as branding opportunity. Try to convey your value. And so that really means, if you've worked on your value statement, try to pull out a piece of that as much as you have space for and prefer to do in your header. And I'm going to show you different ways to do that. Invest in a great headshot. It conveys your brand. If you're someone that's client facing or people facing, you want to make sure that your photo is very approachable. You might have a smile. If you're a teacher, you might wear just a button down shirt. Or if you're a business professional, perhaps you actually have a suit on. So keep that in mind. It's part of your brand. It's good to customize a background photo. It's second to that headshot, but it can also be part of the picture. And then finally, avoid sounding desperate. And by that, I mean, in my opinion, in many career professionals, it's not advised to select open to work. And that's what LinkedIn devised in the last, say, 6 months to a year, where you have a green banner around your face and it says open to work. And so the way I like to, again, show you why it's not as preferable to showing the value and using that space for that is, again, you're driving on the highway, and let's just say you see two billboards. The first one has Joe Smith and it has his face, and it just has a big green banner, open to work. So you know, oh, what I know about Joe is he might not have a job, he's unemployed. Who knows? Or he's just looking for the next job. The second billboard says Joe Smith, and instead of I'm open to work, it says I create productivity shortcuts that save you money, and then how to contact him. So he is what? What is he doing? He's showing his value. How is he going to help you? And so if you compare those two experiences, you want to engage someone to reach out to you. And so the latter, showing your value, is going to win every time. Now, having said that, just as a quick footnote, you might want to, though, select open to recruiters, which is not a public. That's not public. That's private. So those are two different things. So let's look at some actual examples here. So we're just going to start with the LinkedIn headers, and then we're going to move over to the full profiles, where we'll look at about pages with the header kind of as a package. But let's just start with this. This is the number one real estate and very important. So you see all the elements, the headshot, the background image, her name, and then her headline, which are the words that are circled. So for Rachel, she's building her header on roles and skills, which again are good branding concepts. So you see that she says founder and CEO, intercultural diversity faculty, licensed facilitator, and career management expert. So she's really conveying all the roles that she does and her areas of expertise. What are her skills, to use that word again? So someone looking for her could easily find her. But one thing I noticed about Rachel's headline that I thought was very clever is that she's also showing the level of impact. In other words, she's presenting herself as somebody that knows what she's doing in all of these areas. So let's look at those words that convey that. A founder, somebody that's a go-getter. CEO is a leader. She's a faculty member. She's trusted to teach other people and instruct them on her area of expertise. She's a facilitator, a licensed facilitator. She's got the credentials to be a expert facilitator. And finally, a career management expert. So she's really conveying in these few words that this is a person that really knows what she's doing. And I want to reach out to her because she can probably do a good job in what she's offering. So does this work for you? Does it not work? Keep that in mind. And again, you'll be able to revisit this on your own when you get the presentation. So for each one of these, maybe have your own thoughts about what's working and what isn't. So our next example is Caitlin. And Caitlin uses her role and a value statement. So again, I thought I'm mostly choosing these because I think they do it well. I like Caitlin's because she does this very seamlessly. She incorporates her value statement with her role in just one effort. So here's what she says. Professional development and late career consultant who helping people find growth opportunities across their career and beyond. So we see that Caitlin's role is a consultant. And we see her value is to help people find growth opportunities. So that, and then she mentions career, so someone that can help people with their career, finding those opportunities. And she also, some of her keywords includes late career. So Caitlin is specializing in people who are maybe at retirement age. So that would be somebody, she wants to capture those people by using those keywords. What else works here? Caitlin is a client-facing person, and she has a countenance that I think is fantastic for that. A nice open smile, very approachable, pulled together professional, nice bright colors. I think it works really well. That's a great professional headshot, and it backs up. Give me a call. I think you're going to feel really comfortable with me, and I think that she does that well. So well done. And the other thing I want to show about it, remember that billboard example. You have one moment to capture someone's attention about whether they're going to read your about page and stay on your page and maybe reach out to you. She does it simply and helps you digest her offer in mere seconds. So now that we've showed you a couple eloquently simple headers, let's look at one that might have a lot more going on. And so maybe each one of you can think about, does that work? Is that good? Is that not good? Let's see what you think. So Tatiana has clearly a very colorful, creative flair here in the words that she's using and how she puts it all together. So her headline has a lot of personality. So her role, Chief Clarity Officer with a dash of humor. Right away that's very captivating. Then she gives her areas of expertise: inclusion facilitator, team builder, trust rebuilder, futurist with the past. So again, it's the skills, the roles, and then at the top of my page, right, but plus question mark. And so the thing here is, and let's just look at it again before I go on to maybe another way to look at this. She certainly uses her background photo to very, with a definite point of view. So she has what looks like a slogan: wherever there are people, there are differences. So that might be her slogan or tagline in her business. I'm not clear, but she's working apparently in diversity. And so she has a diverse looking group. So that's conveyed. And then also her photo seems to also convey her personality, because clearly she has personality. Clearly she has a point of view, and that comes through, I think, in her headshot. So now, when we were talking before about we want our LinkedIn page to get someone to come to see more about this through the right keywords and branding, and once they're there, to capture their attention and be engaging, I think she certainly captures attention once we're there. But is she going to get people to come to her page? And so that's, I think, is a question. So see what you think. So her role is Chief Clarity Officer. So how possible is it that somebody's going to look for a chief clarity officer? Probably not too likely, is my opinion only. And that's why I think about what you think. Maybe that is going to get people to her site. But if she's using overly unique language that's fun and engaging, but isn't going to help her come up in search, then she can have the best services possible and be at the top of her game, but people might not find her. The other thing that might be a little obscured is her area of expertise. So at heart, she is a DEI person, meaning her specialty is diversity, equity, and inclusion. But she only uses one of those words here, inclusion. So I would imagine that her about page and the rest of her profile uses some of those other words too. But as far as the headline only, which is all we're looking at here, she's missing an opportunity. So that means, again, might not come up in search. And the other repercussion is possibly with all this activity going on, a lot of images, a lot of words, what is trust rebuilder? What is a futurist with the past? There's a lot to digest. What do you think? Is it going to clarify what she's offering? Is it going to entice you to want to reach out and understand exactly how she can help you? Or is it going to turn you away because it's too complicated and you need to move on? You don't have a lot of time, too much. You got to go on to the next person. So, good one to give you some food for thought here. Again, some good things are working and some things might not be working. So, that's the last one I wanted to show you for just the header section. We'll see more though when we look at some examples of full profiles coming up. So now we're going to go to the second most important real estate in LinkedIn for branding, which is the about page. This is the place we talked about before where your commercial can go, and it would be adapted for the about page, a written version. So this is where you connect the dots for your audience in a very succinct, clear, simple way. Those are kind of themes for the night. So for the about page at the highest level, what this really is a place to tell your story. Again, storytelling. So common now, so popular for good reasons. It's an engagement tool. Tell a cohesive and concise story about your professional value you offer, and maybe even a story about I started out here and saw the value to do this, and that has led me to what I'm doing today. If that's relevant for you, it could be a story that tells a trajectory, how you got to where you are today, or maybe just this is what I've always been about, and here's what I offer. So if the important thing here is connection. It's a story that connects to the audience that you want to reach most, your marketplace, your target audience. So again, we can't talk about branding without understanding who we're doing it for. The result of all this is it increases your chance of getting the types of meetings, leads, and interviews that you really want the most. So it really has a very practical value. So when we talk about, your about page, we always want to start with, think about, like we were saying, what and who you want to attract on with your LinkedIn page, with your billboard. Do you want to generate leads? Are you looking for clients? Do you want to get the attention of recruiters? Are you looking for your next job, or make professional connections to grow your network so that you can be a more effective networker or have other goals there? So it's common to think of your LinkedIn page that it really should just be all about you. And so you may be thinking, well, yeah, it should be all about me because this is what it is. And so, yeah, that's true to some extent. But also, another perspective here is any brand strategist will inform you every message is really about, and if you look at the slide here, presenting yourself so your reader thinks this person has the answers I need. Or maybe they have the answers I need. I need to reach out to them. And maybe those answers are anything from solutions to solve the problems in their company, the experience and expertise to hit the ground running because we don't have time to train people, or the skills that we're missing in our leaders so that they can run this new department that we're planning. Or perhaps as a client looking for the right consultant, I can see that they have the expertise and skills that I'm looking for. I want to talk to them and find out. That's what this is really about. So when you present yourself like this, what you really want to do is narrow who you're talking to and identify their needs. So again, we've said that in many ways, but for your about page, you're going to be much more effective if you really know who you're talking to and talk just to them. What do they want? What are their needs? And how are you going to help them? This number two step is use storytelling to show that career arc, if that's relevant for you, leading to what you're offering today, or just the value that you bring. And again, these are those components that were in that 2-minute commercial. So you can go back to that template to kind of help that prompt you through writing one. And then finally, a tip that I often suggest is find a few LinkedIn profiles you like and borrow parts of other approaches that you seem to work for you, what you're offering or your style. Now, I'm not saying copy them verbatim. And I will also offer a caveat here where it can get very confusing very quickly if you start with looking at what everyone else is doing to figure out what you should do. And I hear that a lot from my clients. I look at my friends and no one's writing their value statement, or my friends, all they do is have their current job in their title, their headline. So what's important here is you have the advantage here tonight of getting a lot of different ways that you can approach and improve or enhance your LinkedIn profile to get the results that we were talking about. And so I think it's helpful to kind of first, if you are going to look around and see what other people are doing, to kind of have your own point of view and an idea about how you want to start and where to start. And maybe you'll find some of the samples in here, some of the ways that you want to borrow for yourself. But whatever it is, then you can look around, but have something to start with. Otherwise, you might feel a little overwhelmed, and that's not going to help you get there faster. So now, before we get into some examples, which I'm going to show you next, I want to share with you my 7 top tips for an about page. So the first one is an attention grabbing opener. And the reason is because if you think about the way LinkedIn looks, or the next time you go on, you can see that first sentence in the about page without clicking on to see more. So it's something they'll be able to see when they're just scanning your profile if there's a quick visitor sizing you up. So you want it to be a dynamic opener. The other thing about LinkedIn as opposed to your resume is first person conversational voice is really the trend today. You don't have to do that. Again, remember, these are just kind of the latest thoughts and ways to make LinkedIn more engaging because it's really a marketing tool. And it differentiates from your resume. People can have your resume and your LinkedIn, and together, they can be really hand in glove. So first person helps with engagement. Keep it short. People have short attention spans. They're busy. You do have a lot of words for about pages, but try to break it up into chunks. So one way you could look at it is maybe 3 to 5 paragraphs, each with 2 to 3 sentences. And to get there, it's often harder, as a writer, if you do writing, you know that a lot of it is rewriting. So to get it to be shorter, punchier, and broken up takes a little extra effort, but it's all about getting people to take the time to read what you want them to know. Okay, and a couple times I've talked about using an illustrative success story. It's here again. It offers proof and keeps them engaged. Tailoring your target role with branding keywords, a theme of tonight. Show your character and personality. such as your drive and passion. Great place to do it because it's harder to do that in your resume. However, big caveat, be sure to emphasize more than that your expertise. So, what I advise clients is to literally copy and paste and then edit if needed your expertise or core competencies section from your resume, because those are keywords. They'll add depth and breadth. So, be sure to have those at the end. But my caveat here is you don't want to just show your drive and passion because that doesn't necessarily say that you are an expert. They want to make sure that they're hiring someone who can do the job, but they love the passion. That's just a plus. An example there is you might love opera singing. You go to the opera, you sing in the shower, but perhaps secretly you really can't even carry a tune, or maybe you were never trained as a singer. So that's why you want to do both with the emphasis on your skills and expertise. And finally, I talked before about wrapping up in the case, in the example I gave you before, the 2-minute profile or the commercial. The end is important. So I like to encourage people to use a call for action to make it easier to get in touch. And I have a few different examples on how clients and other people have used the ending to kind of close the deal, if you will. So now let's look at some of these profiles. So I've got 5 to show you. So we're in the last part of our session tonight. And these are things that you can revisit on your own. So I'm gonna quickly point out some of the highlights that I like to bring your attention to. And these are just gonna be showing principles and action of things that we've talked about all night. Your skills, your role, your keywords, your value, your branding. Here's how it goes. So some of these, probably more than that, I've chosen for my own coaching practice because, for one thing, I knew that once we created these profiles or enhanced their profiles, what happened then? And in several cases, I'll give you the story about how it changed or improved their traction on LinkedIn. They got more views and action follow up. So for Courtney, what she does is she has a role front and center. Now think keywords here too. IT architecture, data leader. That's her role. But look how many keywords are packed in there. IT, data, leader, and in her case, architecture is important. Then her value statement. I'll read the whole thing and break it down. Solving complex data problems to help drive business solutions through strategic visioning, program planning, and collaborative team building. Now, Courtney chose to have her full value statement that we had on top of her resume. But the key value she's bringing is she solves complex data problems to help drive business solutions. That's the core. That's how she's going to help the business. And the person who's recruiting, who's not going to want someone who can help them drive better business solutions. And then the secret sauce through, and these were her top 3 competencies and skills that we identified in her resume, through strategic visioning, program planning, and collaborative team building. So this is one I'm actually going to read the full about page because it's actually one of my favorites. Courtney is a real perky person with a great personality. And so I edited this, but she is the author here and she really comes through. And that's great because remember before we said, this is your chance to be first person and have what we like to call an authentic voice. So she might've gone a little farther than you are, but look at her attention grabbing opener. Data glue or data guru? I am both. That's me. I'm an architect data lead who loves to play an integral role of creating data warehouse or big data platforms, designing the process of extracting and refining data so it can be understood and used for decision making. Her story. The biggest data warehouse I've made is 3 petabytes, which is 1/4 of Guinness World's Record. It processed 7 terabytes of data daily and helped my company save $1 million per day. I did not build this DW alone. In fact, I enjoyed laying out the blueprint and working with over 80 individuals to find the best solution to house and retrieve the data efficiently. And then she puts in her skills as keywords here. I am known for my successes in the following areas. We just copied and pasted this from her resume. So what works? Great opener, attention grabber, her value proposition. She did not repeat her value statement from her header because remember, you can see both at the same time. But basically, she's just rewording it in a way for that reader and for her target audience. She wanted to get a new job and she wanted that hiring manager or recruiter to see how she was going to help them. And her success story is an action is one of my favorites because it's so short and yet so powerful. I mean, how many of us can say that we've saved $1 million per day? Granted, but still, she got in there. Not only that, but also she's a person that wanted to go up as a people leader. And so she put in here that she worked not alone, but helped to find better solutions by overseeing a group of people. And that's what she baked in there. So now let me tell you that after we did this, after we created this new profile, she got 25% increase in traction within a week. She was, again, very bubbly, but she was just, absolutely thrilled, of course, that she was getting more people landing on her page, more requests for screening interviews from top companies, Amazon, Google, Facebook, and more. And then she landed a position that fit her goals, being a leader, doing everything she's promising here within 5 weeks during coronavirus. So it's very impressive. And this is just a great one to show. So let's move on. You'll see at a glance that not all of these follow my top tips, but I'm showing these examples for other reasons. Like Monica, another client, took a little longer to tell her story, but she still did it very well. So again, there's not one way to go. But what I liked about her headline is it's written, again, very seamlessly, integrating her value statement with her role. So her role, healthcare account leader, innovator, and strategist. And here's her value statement: creator of highly satisfied and loyal customers and teams. So you see right away, she's a leader. She works in the healthcare field, and as an account leader, she's clearly in a sales role. And just to make sure, she has her keywords in her summary emphasize that she's a salesperson. So I won't read hers. She does have a nice value proposition, a nice voice that's very approachable, a good success story that really talks about specific outcomes. Her skills written a little differently than the others, not just the keywords, but she's a product strategist, and she gives a couple examples: a relationship builder, an account manager leader, and a dedicated coach, and kind of what's important to her. And then her close isn't so much of an invite to action, but rather just 2020 is the 10th anniversary of the Blue and Gold Plan, which is something that she created. And I look forward to continuing to make a difference. So she just wraps it up in a nice, soft way, but a strong ending. So that's Monica. Now, Keith, another former client, is a salesperson with a lot of values that were really important to him. And so I want to show you how he brought these values to the front of his about page. So first, though, let's look over at his headline. So he bakes in a lot of words very well here. Healthcare account leader, telehealth sales specialist, program design. So those are his nouns. Then his value statement, he also chose to copy the entire one in there. Cultivating new business through collaborative relationship building, innovative client solutions, and product development. But what's great about that is there's quite a few things that people could be searching on, and I'm just going to read them out: healthcare, telehealth, sales, program design, new business, product development, client solutions. It's packed with very smart use of keywords that are also branding, because this is his value he brings and his strengths. So I won't read his whole about page, but I'll read a few things that I thought were good. His attention grabber opener, I thought was strong. This is who I am. the one you can trust, a resource that is beyond reproach, transparent, and always pursuing the best interests of the customer. So right there, he's getting his values in there, that he's not someone who's just out to make the money. He's out there to really come up with the solutions that are win-win. Then he gives a value statement that gets back to reciprocal benefits. He gives a success story. In this case, sales can often lend itself to nice quantities, which are always good for success or achievement bullets. But he was able to put it in here. The impact of his story he told was significant. We saw an 83% increase in revenue, over 25% increase in market share, and saved lives. So if you have that, that's great. And that's a very short paragraph. So well done. And then finally, I love his ending. He ends with a pitch and yet also reminds you of why you want to reach out to him. So this, if you're going to go back and look at these, is to me the perfect blend of pitching and call to action. So he goes, want to discuss strategies to increase sales or competitive advantage, or talk about virtual healthcare solutions? Let's connect. And then what I didn't show here was his contact information. But again, he's saying, here's how I'm going to help you. Get in touch with me. Very well done. Okay, so I've got two more. This one's short and simple. This one, number 4, Lydia, not a client. But what I liked about hers is it's showing a different purpose, first of all, for her profile. She's not looking for a job. In fact, her background photo is her current company. And she doesn't try really hard to sell, and yet is very selective and strategic about what she is showing. So she's, you can look at her headline. She's a learning and development specialist, within the HR space. But she also says not only learning and development, which is her area of expertise, but she also neatly integrates um, what she can do, her skills. She can do everything from strategy to execution. So really well done. Short, simple, quick to digest. Her about page, she focuses more on her mission and value. And in a way, she has the luxury to do that because she's not really trying to sell to get a job here. So she's basically saying, I'm always excited for those moments when I can meaningfully help others to become the best version of themselves. So that's like her mission statement for learning and development. And then her call to action is talk with me about, and then, trends in L&D, brainstorm innovative ideas, or chat about experiences and what adventure is next. So it's really low key. It's very simple, but I just think I'm sharing it for those exact reasons. And so finally, my last one, my number 5 LinkedIn profile is Teresa. She was also a client, and she gives a simple and strong effort here, worth looking at again later. She also gained more views quickly and had several offers within about 6 weeks. And it isn't just the profile, but that's usually the way people find you if you're not using it for also referral networking and informational interviewing, and even answering ads through portal. So whatever your technique is, this is a critical billboard to help you. So let's read her headline and value statement. Her role, senior marketing research leader. Her value statement, translating and interpreting data into actionable insights to help companies make better business decisions. So you can see right there what she's doing. She interprets data into insights to help make business decisions. So if you were a hiring manager or if you were a recruiter, you right away see that sounds really good. A marketing person that can really use data in a smart way and show us how to make the right moves for our company. So I liked her opener. Again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but again, very first person engaging voice and something personal about her. Since I remember, I've always to know more about the why and the how. My intellectual curiosity has made me a lifelong learner. And then her next statement is like her key strengths related to experience, but done in a really accessible way. Her value proposition is here. That's well done too. She has a short success story. And then finally, she gives her keywords at the end. I'm known for my successes in the following areas. So, again, see what you think works, doesn't work, maybe something you want to borrow for yourself. But I think that's another worthwhile LinkedIn profile to come back to later. So before we end, I want to again open up to the group here. I'm sure you're all in some stage or another of your own LinkedIn profile, your marketing, statements, how you want to talk about yourself. There's a lot that we covered here tonight. And hopefully, if you come away with just a little, your head spinning, or where do you start after this? Hopefully, by reviewing this presentation and the template that you're going to get tomorrow, it's going to help you bring it to a tactical level and implement it in ways that work for you. But before we go, any questions about something that you're dealing with on your own, or just general as far as branding or LinkedIn? In chat or the Q&A, feel free to put that in there. Okay, no worries there. Then if you do think of something that you want to ask me or I can help you with, I'm using my last slide here just to give you a way to get in contact or just link in with me. So I'm here if you do have a question that you didn't think about tonight, or maybe after you look at the presentation or the template, feel free to reach out. But other than that, I hope you're walking away with some new ideas to try on your own for creating and using your professional branding to help you communicate how you add value in your target role and to your target audience. So everyone, I wish you luck with your journey going forward, whatever you're looking to do. And I hope that your branding on your LinkedIn page leads you to new opportunities and helps you get closer to what you really want to do. So that wraps up my presentation tonight.
Very good.
Thank you for coming, everyone.
Yes, Susan, that was great. You had so many excellent examples. If anything, it's always great to see, the work that people do on LinkedIn and how they get their point across in really effective ways. So thanks for all those great examples. And as you've mentioned multiple times, I'm going to send out the assessment, right? That was the name of it, right? I've forgotten now.
Oh, the
template. The template. Yeah. There's the word.
The branding template.
I'll send the template out along with this slide deck to those of you who have registered, and you can feel free to share that with your friends as well. So again, thank you to Susan for coming out, to everybody for attending, and have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.